YMCA. We're going to get started shortly. Thank you for joining us for this workshop on youth-led market assessments with YCare International and Rowena Humphreys. And I'm going to be handing over to Rahana Murali from YCare, who's going to be sort of leading you through the session. But throughout the session, please make use of the chat box. If you've got any questions, if you've got any thoughts or comments or reflections, please do drop them in there. We'll try and get to them as best we can. Also use the Q&A area as well. We're also to keep an eye on the polls tab. It should come up with a little red icon as the poll goes up. And obviously the speakers will let you know if there's anything for you to answer. So over to you, Rahana. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Wishing everyone a warm welcome into our breakout on the Youth-Led Market Assessment Toolkit. I'm Rahana and I work with YCare International. I'm also joined by my YCare colleague, Biz, as well as Youth Enterprise Unemployment expert, Rowena, who will be leading the session today. YCare International is a partnership-based organisation established in the UK. We work hand in hand with YMCAs and other local youth organisations worldwide to create work and business opportunities for disadvantaged young women and men. We believe that young people should lead in developing solutions to the challenges that they and their communities face. And so we work with young people to conduct research and design programmes that will help them achieve their dreams and aspirations. Building on our commitment to young people, leading research, and building on our experience with youth-led research in Africa and Asia, we worked with Rowena last year to develop a youth-led market assessment toolkit. Before I pass on to Rowena to share more, I will ask Biz to introduce herself. Over to you, Biz.
Thanks, Rahana. So I'm Biz. I work as a colleague with Rahana in YCare International in the International Department. It's great to be with you today, and we're really lucky to have our expert in our market enterprise, Rowena. So yeah, I'll hand over to Rowena. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Liz. Thanks, Rahana, for that warm welcome. And thanks, everyone, for joining today. It's really nice to be here. My name's Rowena. I'm an enterprise employment consultant, and we're looking forward to sharing more with you about the Youth-Led Market Assessment Toolkit. Don't worry if it's new. By the end of this, you're going to have a whistle-stop tour of that. It'd be great if you could just, if you're in the room, if you could just drop in your name and your location just to get a feel for where everybody is. And before we begin, I'm conscious that you probably don't have this youth-led market assessment toolkit. You might not have seen it before. So Rahana Murali is going to have access to that and can grant you access to it at after this session, and her email address will come up at the end. In terms of housekeeping, I'm not going to be taking any questions during the presentation, but as Rahana said, just pop it in the Q&A. Her and Biz are going to be tracking those, so we'll attempt to cover some of those points off at the end. And so I will move over to my presentation. Great to have you, Rowan, from Philippines. I'm here in London. Let me just take this across and I'll just set up my presentation. Okay, lovely. Okay, so you can see me and presentation. Let's just go across. Sorry, Rahana, just a very quick technical one. When I advance the slides, I do that through Google Docs, not through, yeah, right. Thanks. Okay, great, lovely. Okay, so as I said, this is about youth-led market assessment, and we're going to go into the details of that shortly. So this toolkit, it really draws on best practice and trusted resources, and to access a copy, you can contact Rahana. The purpose of today's session is really to introduce the toolkit. Specifically, we're going to go through the purpose of the youth-led market assessment, why we might use it, the youth-led nature of the toolkit, so why engaging youth in its application is so important for both the process and the outcomes. We'll also be sharing some sample extracts and questions from the toolkit to give you a really clear understanding about what's included in it. And we'll also be sharing some results from other projects where it's been applied and some benefits to young people, as well as youth enterprise and employment programming more generally. We're then going to finish off the presentation with some questions. It can help prompt your own thinking about how and you might like to use such a toolkit. And as a caveat, I'm just going to say this was developed at the start of COVID last year, and we haven't field tested this. This is not to say that it's obviously not. It's obviously been based on practical expertise and a lot of good practice within the industry, but our particular toolkit hasn't been tested. So we're certainly going to, if you decide to take this forward and you decide to give it a go, we'd really encourage you to share your experiences and your adaptations. This is really to make sure that we get the most out of the toolkit. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. So the purpose. What's the purpose of a youth-led market assessment? So they're really used to ensure youth-focused livelihoods activities are market-driven and that they're responsive to local economic needs. So the youth-led market assessment includes young people in the design, the data collection, data analysis process, and in turn, it really provides a space for them to inform and adapt the tools, review and update the methodology, and really to learn firsthand from the market research, as well as analyse the findings. So, a youth-led market assessment is exactly as the name states. It's a process led by young people. And that's not to say that other people can't be involved, but it's that young people are really conducting a lot of the fact-finding missions. They take a really meaningful and a leading role in the process. And of course, the market assessment part is that we really are analysing the supply and demand and the context of a good or a service, and we do that through a range of tools, and we apply them to a range of stakeholders to get a really clear picture of the barriers and opportunities that young people face when they're starting their own business and or looking for a job. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail about the tools later. Okay. So why do we use youth-led market assessments? What's the point? What are the benefits? So youth-led market assessments are a really useful way to really immediately generate engagement and ownership and responsibility amongst young people, because given the opportunities to both employ their potential and learn how to use new tools. So they get the chance to contribute their own needs and interest, collaborate with their peers, research experts and mentors to address issues for themselves. They even get an opportunity to improve their self-awareness and explore preferred working styles when you're in a group, as well as individually. In the process, they also are able to develop soft skills, research skills, so both shaping the research agenda whilst also learning about the market and in turn identifying opportunities for their own livelihoods. So young people are also really very highly effective at connecting with their peers, which in turn can help them maybe find or surface insights that researchers might otherwise miss. So young people with tutoring and guidance and relevant guidance become really, really well placed to review the potential markets as well as potential new market opportunities. So the benefits of youth-led markets assessments can really be further reinforced when training and resources are provided to young people undertaking the assessment. So, for example, training them to get the best possible outputs, relating this to the bigger picture, and then thinking about how what they're doing contributes to that. So I've mentioned about youth-led nature of a youth-led market assessment toolkit, but why youth-led? Well, one might argue you could hire a labour market expert to do all this exploratory work in a really, really rigorous way, and of course that is possible. But certain market experts, of course, they certainly have their place. But so do young people, and they can often be forgotten about, even when they're central to the subject matter. So through a youth-led market assessment, we really believe that young people have the potential to lead and to be actively involved in identifying opportunities for their employment and career development or for an enterprise. Then, when provided with the opportunities to build skills and networks, they're able to strengthen their leadership capacity, to be problem solvers, and meaningfully contribute to communities. And through youth-led market assessments, we seek to build and leverage their skills, their assets, and their collective impact to research a market, and ultimately enable them to solve problems for themselves and with their peers and other stakeholders that they're able to speak to during the process. And well, really, the youth-led nature of a youth-led market assessment acknowledges the value and the expertise of young people, and also brings their unique knowledge and role as individuals actually living the research issue. So was on the slide, the youth-led market assessment then really builds upon this by designing a range of research questions, implementing data collection, analysing data, and reporting and disseminating the findings of the assessment. And this is a participatory approach, and it becomes an output in and of itself. So young people were developing the skills as they go. So they're interviewing perhaps somebody who's running a business. They interview education providers, for example, and they're developing the interpersonal skills as they're doing these interviewing and as they're doing these interviews. But they're also acquiring a deeper awareness and deeper ownership of the knowledge that's being generated through the course or over the course of the research experience. So for YMCAs, youth-led market assessments are an opportunity to run assessments themselves rather than outsource to external consultants, and that can really help build organisational capacity and the team's confidence and skills too. And then more broadly, by supporting and mentoring young people to undertake youth-led market assessments, YMCAs can also increase their ownership of the findings, and we assume that would be really, really helpful for when you're informing future initiatives or designing new programs. And so, who is the toolkit for? Well, it's designed for a few audiences. We've got YCI program staff and those delivering and working with local partners to implement youth livelihood programs, and also YMCAs and other youth serving NGO program staff. And we are imagining the involvement, of course, of those with specific expertise technical expertise in the livelihood space or broader enterprise and employment programming. But equally, we obviously advocate that the toolkit is for those who are undertaking the youth-led market assessment itself. So those people who will actually be conducting the assessment and are directly involved in its application. So within the toolkit annexes, we provide guidance notes, for example, on how you might look to staff a youth-led market assessment team. We also give some different scenarios that you can kind of play around with to give you an idea about what your staffing or your teaming arrangement might look like and what are the different cost implications of that. Although these audience will have, we obviously acknowledge that these audience will have an understanding of youth in the enterprise and employment space, the toolkit assumes that you haven't undertaken or commissioned a youth-led market assessment before. And so we've presented a methodological guide, and it's just a very easy to follow step-by-step process that you can tailor depending on the information you already have and also, your preference for the way you like to work. And it's likely that if you're practicing in this space, you've dealt with a lot of the issues and the questions that we propose posing, but perhaps the format and the approach might be a bit new. And ultimately, you may well have some of your own approaches and questions, and you can integrate those so it's flexible. The tools within the toolkit can be applied by young people, but others, we certainly advocate that others are involved too. And so, for example, as I said, we have some different staffing arrangements that you might like to look into, and that could include, for example, somebody like a team leader who's leading the entire effort, and then you've got researchers and enumerators, perhaps somebody from the local university you might like to hire, or a coordinator, somebody most likely from within the organisation. And then a labour market or livelihoods expert is is obviously useful, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be full-time in country. It could be that, you know, you have a neighbouring country that you're working with, and you can just kind of bounce ideas back and forth. So, as I said, there are some different staffing arrangements which really can be applied depending on the time you have available and the budget. I've also suggested in the proposal an editor as well, a strong editor for the final report, just to ensure that we're making sure the information and data collected is really clear and you have some really concise takeaways. And this is not, you know, it's a step-by-step approach. This is envisaged to have young people at the heart of its approach, but it can be challenging and it can be complex for young people involved. But equally, we assume they can rise to the challenge. So we really advocate that skilled mentors, as well as peer-to-peer mentorship, can be a useful way of supporting young people through the intervention. And it can really help them to apply and learn new skills while navigating new and complex challenges and components of a toolkit. So, as I mentioned at the start, this isn't tested. It was designed in the early days of COVID, and certainly we'd advocate for taking the relevant precautions, whether that be, you know, social distancing, mask wearing, small groups, and also taking advantage, of course, of the online, for example, video conferencing or text messaging where possible. But that would have to be tailored to the local environment you're working in. And so what to expect from the youth-led market assessment. And as I said, this can be available from Rahana afterwards. But the tools presented in the toolkit, they incorporate approaches from a range of disciplines. They can be adapted and applied across different geographical and cultural settings. And by applying the tools, market opportunities can be uncovered in existing, new and emerging markets and sectors, which can in turn inform your programming or the programme of YMCAs. So the toolkit really comprises of two sections. So there's a methodological guide, and that is really the bedrock of any good project design. It's really understanding, well, what are your project objectives? What's your desired result? How will a youth-led market assessment support decisions in the project? And the prompts in the methodological guide, as I said, are really the bedrock of the research, and they just really ensure that you fully dive into why you're doing this work. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail later. So then there's a second section, which is the tools, and this comprises of a desk-based review of data, so secondary research, and then we provide examples of the data collection tools. And those data collection tools are mainly interview guides that focus around key informant interviews and focus group discussions, and they can be deployed depending on what information you uncover in your desk-based review. So really the two are continually complementing and triangulating with each other. So within each of the tools that we provide in part 2, in those interview guides particularly, we provide some follow-on activities. We also give really helpful, just tangible tips to really enhance the process, challenge your thinking, check potential biases. And then, as I said, there's further reading as well. So, for example, ideas include where to source data, so examples of places to source new data from, links to completed youth-led market assessments, perhaps run by other organisations, so you can get ideas, or you can kind of get ideas about layout as well as content, just to see what other organisations have done in different contexts, and really how other organisations might tackle the issues that you're facing. So I'll get into a little bit more detail about the methodological guide. This is the part 1, and I'm just going to dive a bit deeper into it. So this is obviously, as a side, prompting thinking prior to doing the YLMA, getting to grips with its purpose, how it will be undertaken, who will be involved and why, and what you want to do with the results. And I'm going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail. And these are a couple of screenshots, but really we propose a 9-step approach. And at each step, we ask a set of questions like these, where in the screen you can see step 1. And then for each of the questions, we give a little bit more information. So as you progress, you get a bit more familiar with the questions, and you might find there are other questions that even strengthen this approach further and prompt you to think more. And as I said before, you might already have your own internal approaches when it comes to project design and project programming. So feel free to incorporate them at this stage. We just normally encourage you to record the answers to the questions that you pose and keep that as a reference point moving forward. It's really helpful for somebody that comes onto the youth-led market assessment to understand the rationale behind it. So the methodological guide includes questions as well as guidance and tips throughout for prompting program design and implementation. And as I mentioned earlier, these are really based on good project and program design. So you might find that you naturally adopt this approach anyway. It's kind of a similar approach to developing a business case for a project, or perhaps a theory of change workshop, where when you're designing a workshop or project, designing a proposal or project. This section, though, the emphasis is really about prompting thinking before doing any youth-led market assessment. And we recommend that the team undertake this together, normally in a workshop setting, engaging the people that are going to be involved in youth-led market assessment. Yeah, I said a workshop setting personally has worked really well in the past. And then the focus of the questions that get posed through this stage really focus on the purpose. Why are you doing a youth-led market assessment? Maybe actually you come out of this and you think a youth-led market assessment is not what we need. Then you look at, well, how will it be undertaken? Who is going to be involved and why? And finally, what do you want to do with the results once they're generated? So after you've worked on it as a team, you might find it helpful to go away and then work on individual sections and then come back together to verify the approach. And this stage of the process really just, I can't emphasize enough how it shouldn't be underestimated, because ensuring clarity at this stage is really going to help with having strong foundations for when you apply the tools later. So for example, when you start doing your desk-based research, identifying the stakeholders to engage in the key informant interviews and focus group discussions, this is a really helpful foundation. So that's the first part of the toolkit. As I mentioned, the second part are the tools themselves. So that first part was really about the foundations, understanding the rationale behind doing a youth-led market assessment, and then these are the tools themselves. So here we suggest a range of data collection tools, and that is desk-based and secondary data collection, as well as primary data collection, so interviews. And the idea is that they're continually checking and triangulating and supplementing each other. And where, for example, you might find a gap in the desk-based research, then the primary data collection comes in to kind of fill that gap. So we recommend doing the secondary data first, and that's a desk-based review. And the primary goals of that are to examine and analyse a range of official statistics and reports that relate to young people, employment in anticipated locations, for example. And then next, to provide a general background, the current economic, political and social situation, and then to establish a foundation that identifies some potential opportunities, business opportunities, employment opportunities that are available in particular sectors that you then would follow up on further during the primary data collection. So the information collected during the secondary data desk research is really important for identifying gaps, as I said, so that's really helpful for identifying the gaps. So with each project, this can be tailored, and the context can be tailored to the programs, can be tailored to the context. And generally, at this stage, when you're doing the secondary data, you're looking at demographics, policy, environment, previous relevant programming within the area that you're working. As I mentioned before, there are links throughout, and this area is no exception. We've included links and ideas about how you might find this information, so relevant key data banks, as well as looking locally as well at key ministries that may normally hold this kind of data. So after the secondary data collection is complete and the gaps are identified, the youth-led market assessment then focuses on collecting primary data. So these are the first-hand sources using key informant interviews and focus group discussions. And these are there's some in the annexes of the toolkit. There's some really helpful introductory statements and templates that you can use for your interviews, all based on some of the brilliant work YCare has already done. So the primary data collection, that really involves a range of techniques, including focus group discussions and key informant interviews, and that's where the toolkit focuses, even though the slide mentions the business surveys and value chain focus group discussions, and I'll come to that. The focus group discussions and key informant interviews focuses on a range of stakeholders, such as young people, communities, other NGOs, government representatives, educational institutions and industry. And the toolkit really also provides some helpful pointers that you might like to include, or some helpful pointers for other types of surveys that you might like to include, so business surveys and value chain focus group discussions. But we've also we haven't focused on the latter, on those final two. We've really focused on the first two. Just bear with me one moment. Okay. So the degree to how heavily each stakeholder is involved really depends on your time, your budget, and also the degree to which young people are available to do this. And so we provided a range of questions, question banks really, for each different stakeholder, based on whether it's a focus group discussion or key informant interview. And as I mentioned before, there's a really handy Excel kind of budgeting template that you can use. So it's kind of got the bare bones of a team versus if you have a bit more time and a bit more money, this is what it might look like. And you can plug numbers into it. So it helps you to develop different scenarios, which, coming from somebody who's developed a lot of proposals in the past, I think this is a helpful addition. So as I said, the interviews, they really complement the initial desk-based research. And so we would anticipate new opportunities and as well as challenges arising from the primary data that perhaps weren't so clear in the secondary data. And that's where you can explore it. And if something comes up in an interview with a TVET college manager, then it might be then something that you explore further with an employer, for example. As I said, there's quite a large bank of questions that we provide, and we also give some rationale for why we've included most of them and what you might take away from the questions, from the responses that you get from the question. And they're not exhaustive. So again, you might find something based on your own work that there's something missing, and so I just encourage you to feed that back to Rahana, and you can keep adding to this. It's not a done deal. This is a living document. And then I've also, thanks to YCare's existing work that they've already done, some great work around training people on how to run focus group discussions and key informant interviews. There's some really helpful tips in the annexes again that you can draw on, depending on what level of resources you have access to. But there's some really good tips and best practice that you can draw on in the annexes. So the questions themselves, they focus on a range of inquiry areas. So anything from opportunities for generating income, skills, capacity, perceptions, and interests. And with each stakeholder, we anticipate young people asking a slightly different question around a particular topic, and ultimately they build a 360-degree picture of an issue, combining, as I said, the desk-based research with the primary data, but the primary data looking at a range of stakeholders. So, for example, young people may meet with a group of other young people considering a topic around TVET. So, what access do you have? What access do you have to skills training? What do these cost, and what do you think about the quality? And then they might ask around the same lines of inquiry of a local business, what skills do they think they need to see in their business to see their business developing as well as it possibly could, and what advice might they give to a young person wanting to come into work in their business. So overall, we anticipate that by undertaking the desk-based and the primary data collection, you get a much fuller picture of the market in which young people operate. And then again, by including young people in the design, the data collection, the analysis process, we're really providing a space for them to inform and adapt the tools, review it, update the methodology, and really, really importantly, is to learn firsthand from both the research approach and the findings that they generate. So, as I mentioned previously, we haven't tested this, but that's not to say youth-led market assessments are new. They're not, and as I mentioned, they've been applied all over the world. So there's a variety of different settings that they've been applied in, including fragile post-conflict states, for example. And so I just did some. I just thought it would be interesting for people to see here, possibly that. That the results, well, obviously the results from youth-led market assessments, they vary depending on your focus, your sample size, the stakeholders are engaged, but it really has the opportunity to develop two sets of results. And I've mentioned this a few times now, but it's really the terms of direct benefits to young people that participate in terms of skills that they're developing, and then in terms of the information that the assessment actually generates. So in regard to the direct benefits to the young people who participate, there was I wanted to just draw on the food security cluster of the World Food Programme. They undertook a youth-led market assessment in Ukiah camp in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh. And so young people cited directly the following benefits. They mentioned young people gained research and leadership skills through their involvement in designing the research instruments. They developed soft skills such as leadership, decision-making, communication, cooperation. They enhanced their understanding of the market trends, skills and capacities needed, constraints in entering the labour market. And then also young people expanded their own network with other young people, as well as employers and the community. So ultimately, young people were able to get their own fuller perspective on the situation that they were in. And as I said before, there's a second set of benefits, and that really comes from the information that's actually generated by undertaking the desk-based research and those stakeholder consultations, the key informant interviews, the focus group discussions. And there was a program that there was an example from Jordan undertaken by Mercy Corps, which showed how youth-led market assessments discovered three key barriers that were impacting young people, and these were business barriers. So specifically there was mismatches between the expectations versus realities of markets. And then there were some social barriers that were uncovered, and they were including gender roles and responsibilities. And specifically, there was a domination of family members in managing labour decisions, especially in the case of females, which was seen to impact on youth by keeping them in their comfort zones and encouraging not to explore new and practical business experiences. And then there were some knowledge barriers. So in terms of a lack of support systems that could guide young people on basic communication and presentation skills. So in terms of Mercy Corps programming, the primary and secondary data combined, and that informed a program on getting that later informed a program on getting young people into work. So I think, as well as informing programming and empowering young people from a fundraising perspective, this type of information also could be quite valuable in terms of strengthening offerings to potential donors. Certainly enables a deeper understanding of the issues gained, and through the application of very participatory research methods. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope everyone's managed to stay with me during that. And so we've got a poll coming up now, and I think that might be already sent. Yeah, so if anyone wants to respond to that poll, that would be great. And then I just really wanted to say thank you, first of all, for listening to the presentation. Maybe I can just stop sharing now. Bear with me. Yeah, and then really just to get some, if there are any initial questions that have come up, Rahana or Elizabeth, feel free, or I can take a look.
Thanks so much, Rowena. That presentation's been really interesting and really informative as well.
Thanks.
So really grateful to you for that. Thank you. So we're going to move now to audience participation. We'd really strongly encourage you to fill the poll. I think Rowena earlier on in the session explained about the chat poll people Q&A functions, and I imagine most of you are quite familiar. So if you can go to the poll in your own time, that would be great. The poll is now up there. It reads, now that you know more about youth-led market assessments, so now you know more about youth-led market assessments, how do you think you can most benefit from being involved? And there's 4 different options there. Build my soft skills, build my research skills. Number 3, meet with other like-minded young people. Number 4, all of the above. So we're going to hear what you think. Click on your preferred option.
Thanks, Biss. I'm reading that question now, and it does look a bit of a mouthful, doesn't it? So I can imagine if people need a few seconds to take that one in.
It's a fairly long question, isn't it? Meanwhile, we'll give you a few minutes also. If questions for Rowena on the Youth-Led Market Assessment Toolkit, or indeed for YCare International, that Rahana and I can help you with, please pop those into the Q&A section if you'd like to ask a question, and we'll come to those. Just looking at one question that was asked earlier, this is a question from Yeni Su. Apologies if that is not correct pronunciation, but the question from Yeni Su is how to be a member of the YMCA. So how can someone become a member of the YMCA? Rahana, would you be able to answer to that one, please?
Absolutely. Great to hear that you want to become a member. That's fantastic. I'm not sure where you're currently based, but what I will do is I will post a link to the World YMCA website in which the World YMCA members are listed on a map. And depending on the country you're in, you can click on that country, and then there will be contact details for that specific YMCA in that particular country. And you can then reach out to them individually to ask about membership, how you become a member, is there a subscription, how does it work? So I'll put that in the chat function right now.
Great, thanks, Rahana. Question that's come from Rowan Cardinal. Actually, this looks more of a request than a question. It's a request for a copy of the toolkit. I think this has also come up in the chat earlier on from some of you. Very happy to share. I noticed that Rahana has already committed to emailing out copies of the toolkit. So please leave your contact details in the chat, and we'll send that out to you. Okay, I think that's it on the question for now. Rowena, handing back to you.
Sure, sure. So it might be interesting to hear if anyone's used a youth-led market assessment before in their work, and whether or not, they might be interested in using one going forward.
looking at, we've got some results coming in. I don't know if you'd like to share them, Marina, from the poll.
Sure, thank you.
I can go
Right,
ahead.
so yeah, so definitely in favour of all of the above. So yeah, and I think that's the beauty of a youth-led market assessment. You know, it builds soft skills in terms of how young people are actually undertaking the work. So, for example, through interviewing, let's say, local business owners, they're developing interpersonal skills. They're really building confidence. They're also and yeah, we found that in the past it's been a really helpful way of developing networks with employers, as well as raising their awareness of, for example, skill training opportunities. And then it's building the research skills themselves, so understanding you know, how to develop a relevant sample size, or how to run an interview, how to sequence your questions, how to read graphs, how to read data, whether it be macroeconomic or, you know, kind of yeah, it could be kind of more detailed macroeconomic data versus reading the results of a questionnaire that you've posed. And I think certainly throughout the whole process, young people are continually engaging with each other. You know, working as a team, you know, and I think that for many might be the first time they've done it outside of a school setting, and really working together on a project, understanding the group dynamics, understanding your role in the team and what strengths you bring versus that of others. And so, you know, if somebody selects in this poll all of the above, I'd say, well, you're certainly going to get that from a youth-led market assessment. And it's just a great piece of work to be involved in, really, because, you know, young people really benefit throughout the process. And then, of course, once it's over, they walk away with these skills as well as this knowledge about what the market is doing, and perhaps a better understanding as well as their role within that market.
That's great. Thanks, Marina. Actually, I have another question as well for you. Perhaps it's more of a reflection, but just thinking about if the YMCA or another CSO was going to implement the toolkit, how do you think it could work, or would it work alongside a market expert doing a kind of broader research around the wider market, whether it's at kind of a local level or a regional level, or even perhaps a national level? Is that something that could complement the youth-led toolkit?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And it completely complements. And I think, you know, part of the secondary data research as well, I suppose, first of all, if you're going to do the piece that I said up front, the first part of this is really to understand the rationale for the program. You'd look at what is the purpose of bringing on a market assessment expert, or, you know, a market expert versus, you know, where does a market expert bring add the value, and where does the youth-led market assessment bring in the value? So it's about understanding how the two are interrelated. And then I certainly think that you know, a market expert, or, you know, an enterprise expert are likely, depending on the expertise, that they are likely to have perhaps a better grasp of you know, econometric type data, or perhaps some of the larger data sets. But also, you know, that can also be where you bring in university students to participate in youth-led market assessment. And then young people, you know, they have a great ability and a great affinity to also be able to engage with other young people, you know, on a peer-to-peer level. I think that we're thinking about power dynamics, for example. You know, how does that relate? Are you bringing, where does your market expert come from? Are they, you know, are they from the country that we're working in, or are they coming from a completely different place? I think that ultimately the two can certainly complement each other. It's just about knowing what do you want to get out of it, what do you want to get out of it, and also how much budget you have. I think that's always a big limitation on projects. And I'd say one thing that I've seen is that, you know, for example, if you do have an expert in, that they don't go off and just do it on their own, that actually you have work into the terms of reference, some sort of shadowing, or some sort of, you know, for example, if they end up doing some sort of a rapid value chain assessment? Can you have university students do it with them? You know, if for example, if there's an economics master's student or a graduate that you're working with in the YMCA anyway, how can you think about bringing them in to really benefit the skills base in the country that we're working in? And just, yeah, so lots of ideas. I hope hope that all makes sense.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. No, that definitely makes sense. It's really comprehensive. Thanks ever so much, Rowena. Perhaps just to quickly revisit the poll again. I know we said that the answer that got the most votes was all of the above.
Yeah.
A reminder that on the question, how do you think you could most benefit from being involved in these youth-led market assessments? Others that got votes were build my soft skills and build my research skills as well. So yeah, those got votes as well. Great.
And I suppose it depends on where you think you've already got your existing skills. You know, it might be that somebody's got a lot of research expertise, for example, from a university course, or just some early work experience versus, you know, actually you might have been sitting in a room just plugging away at the research, and now actually you really want to build the soft skills, you know, working in a team, working like cross-culturally, working cross disciplines. And I suppose it depends a little bit on where your expertise currently lies.
Of course, thank you. Okay, great. We're nearing the end of our time. Perhaps if I could hand to Rahana for a few words to close before we go to Natalie.
Thank you, Biz, and thank you so much, Rowena. That was a really clear and helpful presentation. Well, just to thank you all as well, everyone that's joining us from your various corners of the world. Thank you for being such active participants. And please do feel free to email us if you'd like to find out more on the topic, or if you'd like a copy of the toolkit, as Rowena mentioned. I've put my email address in the chat function, so take it down and please do feel free to email. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Natalie will help direct us back into plenary. Over to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Rahana and Rowena and Bis. Thank you for that amazing session on youth-led market assessments. I've got lots of notes myself, having worked briefly with Rowena last year, and it's absolutely fascinating work. So thank you all for your time. Thank you everyone for watching. As Rahana said, we're going back to the main and final plenary of the Youth-Led Solutions Summit for 2021. That's going to start in around 4 minutes. And of course, there'll be more breakout sessions. Everything is going to be on the World YMCA YouTube page. So there's anything you've missed here, maybe you had to step out or take a call or something, everything that's being recorded is going to be available on the World YMCA YouTube channel in the coming days and weeks. So thank you, and hopefully see you in the plenary session.